Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Iveson, the podcast where she speaks to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about why they connect with nature.
Robin Esrock is a best-selling author, award-winning journalist, and TV host. He's been profiled as a travel expert on 5 continents and created and co-hosted Word Travels for OLN, National Geographic, and Travel Channel International. Robin has written 6 best-selling books, including The Great Global Bucket List and The Great Canadian Bucket List. Based in Vancouver, Robin is currently a columnist and travel ambassador for Canadian Geographic and a national board member of the Travel Media Association of Canada. Please welcome Robin Esrock. Robin Esrock, welcome to Let's Take This Outside.
Great to be here.
We've already had an entire preamble. You were like, we're talking in the future because this can be released in the future. But we're just talking about rugby and how much you like it because the Olympics are on right now. And you were just watching the Canadian women's rugby game, right?
Winning a silver medal, although we didn't see the last minute, but I'm pretty sure they won a silver medal, which is amazing for Canada. They beat France and Australia, and women's rugby is amazing because they play their hearts out. You could just see their hearts are coming out their mouths. They're running so hard and tackling so hard. It's amazing. You're
from South Africa, right?
That's right.
Is that where rugby comes from, like the love of it for you, or not till you moved to Canada?
No, from South Africa.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
You're like, nah, from Canada.
Yeah. No. Yeah, grew up with rugby. Sport is, South Africans are crazy about sport. It was the only thing that brought that country together for, decades and decades and decades. And to this day, the country's fractured and screwed in so many levels, but sport just has this power of bringing people together. And I'm surprised people don't travel more for sport. I mean, they do, but I'm surprised people don't do it more, just because it's you discover an interesting destination in the context of a major sporting event.
Have you ever traveled for work for like a sporting event or any kind of like major game or soccer or like?
I've done the Rugby World Cup. I have this fantastic story about going to the African Nations Cup, which, Clint Eastwood made a movie about the South African rugby team winning the Rugby World Cup. But there was another story that's under the radar, which was South Africa's soccer team winning the African Nations Cup shortly after, in their first international tournament after apartheid. And I was there to witness that, and that was unbelievable.
What year was that?
95 or 96, I think. Your tickets meant nothing. The stadium could seat, I think, 80,000, and there were like 120,000 people jammed in there. And it was so tense. And there was marijuana just going everywhere, just clouds of it. Yeah. And these guys are playing, and there were a handful of white spectators in the sea of massive, because it was in the township in Soweto. And I mean, this is just so early days of post-apartheid. So there was just this weird, there's this uneasiness, but this excitement. And South Africa ended up winning. And it was honestly one of the most incredible things to witness.
This might have been the first time I've ever talked about soccer or rugby on this podcast before. so I'm glad. And it might be the new record for how long it took for me to ask the first question officially. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this, I'm like, you know what? Should I scrap all of my questions and just talk about like.
It's the Olympics. It's perfect. Yeah.
Your journey in this world started by accident, literally. When it comes to travel and traveling for work and writing books and doing TV and making an entire amazing, incredible, impressive career out of this. So what happened when I say it started by accident?
Well, thank you for acknowledging that I've managed to somehow build a career in a very, very...
It's impressive. As a freelancer, it's impressive.
It's a very, very interesting industry. I had a desk job. I was working in marketing and PR and comms for a music agency. My first love and passion was music, and I wanted to be a rock star because my name is Robin Esrock, and that just felt like destiny. But it was a very interesting time, not too dissimilar to where we are today. Digital distribution technology was decimating the music industry, or more than decimating, because it took out more than 2/3 of the industry's revenue. No one's buying CDs anymore. Bands that would normally get signed are not getting signed. Record labels are falling by the wayside. And my job is to work with new talent. And, I got to work with some amazing artists and see them come from nothing to everything. But that was a rare exception. It was a soul-crushing time to be in the music industry because you could just see so much talent, so much potential. And it wasn't anything that they did. It was just the way that the industry was transforming. So I was getting paid very little and my job was soul-crushing. And then a car ran me down on the way to the office. I had bought a scooter for the summer to live free and ride hard and be a rock and roll star. Because,
Where was this?
In Vancouver.
It was in Vancouver, okay.
Yeah, and nothing says rock and roll like a scooter. So I bought the scooter. I was riding to work in a car, didn't see a stop sign, and just went through. And that was without doubt the best thing that ever happened to me. I broke my kneecap in the accident, but I received a $20,000 insurance settlement. It wasn't $2 million, it wasn't $200,000, but it was enough for me to really look at my life and go, is this where I want to be? Is this what I want to do? What have I accomplished? I'd love to travel. I'd always backpacked when I could. But, when you're traveling, you often meet these people who are doing these long journeys, those 1 year around the world things. And like, who does that? What kind of people do those kind of things? And suddenly I thought, my career's going nowhere. And how much would it cost to actually do that? And if you live very frugally and, you avoid expensive destinations, at the time, a round the world ticket was $5,000. I cashed it in and I went traveling around the world, started writing about it to remember everything that would happen to me during this one amazing year, because after that, it's over. I'd come back, I'd find a job, and this would be my 1 year of going out there, taking on adventure, living to life to my fullest. And I wanted to remember it. So I just started writing everything that would happen to me. I uploaded it all to a website, which today would call a blog. Back then, it was just a way for me to back things up so my diary wouldn't get stolen, which happened to a friend of mine. So that's how it all started, literally by an accident.
I'm really interested in this ticket around the world. Is that still a thing? And if it is, how much would it cost in today's standards?
It is still a thing. So Star Alliance have one, One World have one. It's nowhere near as affordable as it used to be.
I bet.
But it's still a very affordable way to do it. I had a paper ticket. If I lost my paper ticket, I was hooped. But it had a very high category. So it was open-ended, 12-month around the world. So it was based on continents or mileage. I should look into it again today because I'm not quite sure how it would work today. But back then, it was like 4 continents cost X, 5 continents cost X. And then you just call ahead and you say, I want to get on that flight from A to B. And they book you on it. So I went Vancouver, Lima, Prague, overlanded to Budapest, Istanbul to Dubai, I think. Dubai, it was just crazy, these hops. And it was open-ended and I had no itinerary. There was nothing like I didn't plan this trip. In fact, one of my rules was no planning. So it would I had no intention of going to Brazil and Argentina, but I ended up spending like 2 months there. Some countries I got to, and like Croatia I got to, and I was really looking forward to the Dalmatian coast, but it was so expensive. My budget was 35 Canadian a day, including accommodation, activities, and food. so and I was like, oh, I can't afford to be here. Albania, let's go check out Albania. And it was amazing. It was people were like, what are you? I'm like, I'm a tourist. They're like, oh, that's amazing. We don't get
First
those.
one.
Yeah.
First one.
So just this great adventure. And when I came back, that website started picking up an audience, and a column in the Vancouver Sun was suggested, why don't you write for a newspaper? I'd never written for a paper in travel like that. Pitched the editor, got lucky, got a column, and started building up an audience. And it just starts. You just have to start. I get a lot of questions about travel writing, and I was like, you just got to travel and you just got to write. If you love traveling and you love writing, those two things will come together. Today, things have changed so dramatically, of course, because now it's all about, content creation and influencing and algorithms. And there was a kind of something a bit more naive and pure about it back in the day, but it's still going.
Is that where your love of travel began, was when you bought that ticket, or was there, did you travel a lot as a kid, or?
Didn't travel a lot as a kid. In fact, my dad took his first flight in his 30s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they didn't travel much. I went backpacking when I was 18 to Europe. That was my first kind of thing of it. I don't know, there were a couple books I read that were very influential on me, that had a big influence, that just seemed like there's this big world out there. And if you just open yourself up to it, it's not a scary world. I think this is one of the biggest things that I come across is that people are scared to go out there because we just get bombarded with negative news, and it sounds like a very scary world. Like the second you get off a plane, bad things are going to happen. You're going to get sick. You're going to get robbed. There's going to be a war. The economy's going to crash. There's going to be a wildfire. There's all these things that we just hear all the time. But for the vast part of the world is beautiful and safe, and people would really want to meet you and help you if you ask them for help. But we don't hear about that very often. And that was something I kind of picked up quite early in my career. I was like, just go out there, and if things start going a bit haywire, don't panic and just smile. And I'm not a threat to anybody. And you can get unlucky, but you can also stack the odds in your favor.
At what point were you like, I can make a career out of this? Was it the paper, or was it just like over time and being like, oh, I'm making money, I guess? Was there like, you're like, I could do this full time?
Well, I came back from that year. I was broke. I spent all the money I had and got into some credit cards as well. But I was getting published, and my commitment on that year was 1 day a week, no matter where I was, I would find an internet cafe. I was traveling with a laptop, which back then was also unheard of. And I would sit down at an internet cafe and I would write everything that happened to me during that week in the last 6 days. I would go through all my photos and choose the 20 or 30 best photos. I'd caption them and upload them to this website. And then from my 3,000 to 5,000 word of what happened, I would kind of put together an 800 word column. And, the light bulb went off after about the third month of doing the column, that people would give me an experience that I couldn't afford if I would write about it. And this was an amazing epiphany, because I hadn't joined any associations. I'd never read any books about travel writing. No one ever held my hand and said, this is how this thing works. I was just traveling and writing, spending my own money and doing what I do. I was in Brazil, in Rio, and these guys were hang gliding over the beach, doing tandem hang glides. And I was like, oh, that would be amazing. I'd love to do that. But it was $200. And obviously I couldn't afford it, but I was hanging around, and there was like a little kiosk. I started drinking a coconut. One of the pilots came and I started talking to him about it. And I said, oh, that would be amazing. How much is it? $200? I can't do it, And we got talking. I said, yeah, I'm writing a column for a newspaper in Canada. And he said, oh, well, will you write about, if I take you up, will you write about it? And I was like, if you take me up, that's the only thing I'll write about. That would be like my lifetime highlight reel. He was like, well, come on, let's go. And that's when the light bulb went off, going, hang on, I can use this profession to do things that I couldn't afford to do. And there's no it's very different to I'm getting paid to do it. It's more like they're opening the door to let me have an experience that I would write about if I could pay to do it. And that was the epiphany. So when I came back from that year, I'd realized that if I just spent a little bit of time pitching other newspapers and magazines with all the stories that I'm writing anyway, maybe I could get somewhere. And then I started to pick them up one at a time, just one here, one there, one there, one there, one there, and started building up a reputation. My first press trip came shortly after that. I was approached. I think it was Malaysia approached me. And they said, you'll pay for me. Hang on, I just want to understand this. You're going to pay for me to go and have an adventure in Malaysia? And they're like, yeah. And
all included.
And all included. Flights.
And money.
No, they're not going to give me any money, but they're going to pay for everything.
They're paying for everything. Okay, got it.
So I was like, okay, that's yes. Yeah, okay. And then after that, I did my first speaking event for Travel Cuts. I don't know if they don't exist anymore, but I booked my round the world ticket through Travel Cuts, and they were following my website, my blog, and they said, can I talk about it? And hundreds of people showed up to this talk, and it's like. Then they said, well, would you like to go do the Trans-Siberian Railway? We've got this package. It's called the Vodka Train. We'll put you on it and just write about it and talk about it. And it's like, I love writing. I love talking. And you're going to put me on the Trans-Siberian Railway? Now, but making a living, you touched on, is a different thing because, all this experience doesn't pay a mortgage, doesn't pay a car payment, doesn't pay all this stuff. So I was doing odd jobs. I'd in the middle of the night, I'd put up advertising outside 7-Elevens. I was doing like production assistant work on commercials. I was doing some landscaping. I was doing whatever I could just to kind of get some income. But then I'd go off and do all these amazing trips that were coming my way. That's a very long way of saying, yeah, that's when I started thinking, if I just stick with this, good things are going to happen. And they did.
Let's Take This Outside now has a newsletter. Keep up to date with outdoor news, events, and great discount codes and deals from our partners. Sign up today at letstakethisoutside.ca.
I do want to zoom in on our beautiful country. If someone told me that the only place, like if my passport was taken away and it's like, all you can do is just travel in Canada from now on, I'd be like, okay. Like I would be totally okay with it. If you're Canadian, want to travel within our beautiful country, the amount of people who I'm like, have you been in the Rockies? And I know it's privilege. I know there's like so many things to it. But people who haven't seen the ocean or the Rockies or even left the province, wherever they are, I'm like, okay, I feel like so privileged and so lucky that I've been able to do that. I guess it depends where you are, but where are some great places to start when it comes to traveling within Canada? We are so lucky here.
Yeah, so Canada, I was writing a column for the Globe and Mail several years after this, and Canada Day was coming up, and my editor said, can I write about Canada? And I was only focusing on unique international experiences. And I thought, okay, well, what kind of experiences can you do in Canada that you can't do anywhere else in the world? That was my idea. And I put together, I just researched it. And it's like, well, that sounds really cool. That sounds really interesting. That's unique. And the following week, a publisher approached me to write a guidebook, which I said, no way, because this was 2011 and guidebooks were already, you can't compete with Google and TripAdvisor and Yelp and all the rest of it. And I said, but what if I actually travel to every province and territory and look for these experiences and do them and write about them? And that turned into the Great Canadian Bucket List, which has now taken me to every province and territory multiple times in search of these unique experiences. And I think that's what's often overlooked, is just how many things you can do in this country that you can't do anywhere else in the world. It's one thing to say go for a hike or go for a bike ride or see a beautiful lake. There's lots of hikes and bike rides and beautiful lakes. But, there's this, just looking at the back here, I mean, like polar bears, the Magdalen Islands, the Haida Gwaii, smoked meat in Montreal for vegetarians, the Northwest Passage, the Rafter Tidal Wave in Nova Scotia. These are just really unique experiences. Where should you start is usually in your own backyard, because I think a lot of people get intimidated. I found that people on the West Coast have this bucket list idea of going to the East Coast. I'd love to go to Newfoundland. And then in Newfoundland, they say, I'd love to go to BC. And it's so expensive and far that they usually think, well, why should I spend that money when I can just go to Europe? And my response is, because they're completely different places. It's not Europe, Yeah. It's like Newfoundland is not Ireland. I mean, I know you think, redheaded kids running around with laundry flapping in the winds, but it's just not the same place.
I was just in Newfoundland. It's not really. There's a little bit of an accent, but it's not that, no.
It's a completely unique place. And at the same time, it's also quite familiar. It's part of Canadian culture and there's things you've heard about all this time. So it's such it's a far more rewarding travel when you get to learn about the country you live in. So if you live in Newfoundland and I've never gone to the Rockies, well, just start. Okay, go to the next province over. Go to the next town over. Go to the next national park over. And slowly make your way. And, the prairies often get overlooked, terribly underrated as a travel destination. Everybody thinks there's just nothing there. But if you go there, there's actually a whole bunch of unique experiences there. Everything from like Canada's Dead Sea to the largest concentration of snakes in the world. Like this big, like really bizarre stuff, but amazing. There's fantastic road tripping. There's a beautiful country for road tripping in the summer. There's so much great stuff, but I think we just tend to overlook it, and Canadians tend to beat themselves down quite a bit. And I think this is a cultural thing. It's like, this is good, but it's not as good as what's down south or what's in Europe, or and I'm like, nah, it's actually
that's not true.
It's actually better, and you just need to give it a chance.
Globally, I'm sure it's really hard to narrow down, but where should we be traveling? And how do we do it better? Everything's hella expensive right now in life, right? But people may still want to travel and explore. Like, where should we be trying to go and more efficiently?
Look, when people say like, well, they always ask me, what's my favorite country? So I've done 120 countries, and it's like, well, there's a favorite. And if I give you a name, Brazil, you're going to go, oh, then Brazil's amazing because Robin Esrock said so. It all depends on who you meet and what you're into. I always say what you're into. You're into food, culture, history, adventure, nature. It's all going to be a different answer.
Well, this is let's take this outside. So let's focus on nature, maybe.
Yeah. So you want to look for places. I think the most rewarding travel is when your expectations are low. The higher expectations, the more disappointed you're going to be. And this is something our US friends really struggle with, is they go into Europe, especially expecting everything like the way they've seen it in a Rick Steves documentary, or
right.
And it's just like, well, no, it just doesn't work like that. And go to places where your expectations are low, and I almost guarantee you're going to come back and go, that was unbelievable because I had no idea. So, say with Europe, I'm like, so few people put the Baltics, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. It's not even like a consideration, but it's got all the old town squares, the history, the culture, the Europe of Europe. It's half the price. There's a third of the people, and you're going to get a fantastic European experience, as opposed to what you're going to go high seas in Paris or Barcelona or Venice, or it's like, steer clear where everybody else is going, and that's whether it's whatever you're into, whatever. If there's food, everyone like Italy is amazing with food. What about Portugal? There's always an alternative that's just slightly askew. When people ask me about favorite countries, I say, look, there are places I've been to. It doesn't matter what you're interested in, you're going to find it there. And they were so fascinating for me, and I love going there and returning a few times because I was always so surprised. And places I think of like Bolivia, Iceland, South Africa, Turkey. There's countries that just, Brazil. Every time you go back, you're like, whoa, I had no idea. India is just like its own universe. Yeah, in terms of the most spectacular scenery I've ever seen, I would say Iceland. But the Rockies are just, something else as well.
We're both part of the Travel Media Association of Canada, and I've heard of people going to the Torngat Mountains, which I really hadn't really heard of much besides this within the last year or so. And they're in like northern Labrador. Have you been?
It's a pain point for me. Torngats are my trigger warning. So I was supposed to go. I was booked to go. So Parks Canada have base camps in these remote northern national parks.
Yes.
And more people summit Mount Everest than visit these base camps, to give you an idea. You arrive in these places and you are in your own world. And I've been to one in Evavik National Park in northern Yukon. I was booked to go to the Torngats, and we arrived at Happy Valley Goose Bay in Labrador. I drove the Trans-Labrador Highway. It was kind of tacked onto that trip. Labrador is just bonkers. It's like a completely different planet. And the bad weather, you fly up there, and they couldn't get the plane up because of bad weather. So they said, well, let's just keep an eye out on the weather and we'll wait for a break. And I spent 3 days on a leather couch at the Happy Valley Goose Bay Airport waiting for a plane to take off, and it never did. They canceled the trip. So it's like so close. Like I was there.
That's painful.
And it just, yeah.
I'm so glad that I could bring up some traumatic event for you. I'm sorry.
But, it's like, this is the thing. You can't choose what happens. You choose how you can react to it. I mean, I got to hang around Happy Valley Goose Bay. It was a disappointment. But then we continued the ride. I mean, it ended up at Battle Harbour, which I didn't really know existed. And it was amazing. One of the most special places. Maybe it wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have appreciated it as much, or we wouldn't have had the time to see it. Like one thing kind of leads to another. The amount of times, like when I was talking about sport and how I'm a jinx with watching live sport, the amount of times weather has kind of derailed a once in a lifetime moment, I've lost count. Hot air ballooning, especially. For hot air ballooning, the weather has to be just right. And I think I've had about half a dozen hot air balloon rides on 4 continents cancelled.
You're absolutely right. Like, this is like a much smaller version of that. But in upstate New York, there's something called the Adirondacks, and there's 46 peaks that are over 4,000 feet. And I'm trying to do all of them. I'm halfway done. And I love it there. It's kind of like a home away from home now. However, I would say half those peaks so far, like a half of those I had no view at the top. It's all about like they're hard, they're like gritty, they're like full day hikes, and you get to the top, there's no view, and you're like, I guess it was about the journey. Like, I guess that's what it was, right?
I'm doing a river rafting. This is my year of the bucket list, which is hilarious because I spent 20 years of my year on the bucket list. But this year especially.
This is the year of the bucket list.
This is the year.
This is it. Yeah.
And I came up with a list of my list of things of like what I see and doing river rafting, like a multi-day, a week-long river rafting trip. I've always wanted to do it. I've done lots of one-day amazing river rafting trips, but I've never done a week in the wilderness. And I polled a whole bunch of writers. I was like, where's the one spot? Where's the place? And they said the Salmon River, the River of No Return in Idaho, which I've never been, I've never heard of. But
no return. That sounds ominous. Okay.
The River of No Return. So I'm off to do it end of August. And I'm just like wildfires and floods. And who knows what's waiting for me out on the River of No Return. But I'm trying not to think about it. So I'm very much looking forward to that. A lot of the times I just like, I don't want to think too much about it because I've been disappointed in the past. And it's just like everything is a surprise. And, I always go back to that first year when I was traveling around and I had no itinerary. And I'd wake up in the morning and there were 3 decisions, like where am I going to sleep, what am I going to eat, and when I'm going to find a toilet. Those are the 3 decisions that just, as long as I had those 3 decisions, those answers to those 3 questions, life was grand. And there was something pure and beautiful about that, because we tend to go, I don't know, some people love to plan everything down to the nth degree and others go with the flow. I know they tend to marry each other in my experience. But it's there's just something pure about going into any experience and just seeing what happens.
I'm definitely one of those over planners, but I also am able to go with the flow. I'm trying to like release some control in these situations, so I understand. Okay, you have the Great Global Bucket List, the Great Canadian Bucket List, the Great Australian Bucket List. Also, you just released the Great Western Canada Bucket List, a little more niche. Let's narrow it in. What other countries would you like to do? And I'm assuming you'll do an Eastern Canada one too. But is there any countries that you would like to do or we'll be working on?
The Western Canada one is the 2nd edition. The first one came out in 2015, I think. I did an Atlantic Canada one as well. There's a 3rd edition of the Canadian book coming out next year. Publishing being what it is, I had 100 new experiences to add, and they wanted me to cut a 1/3 of the page count. So I'm not even thinking of it as, it's not like this is now the latest edition. I think it's a companion to the 2nd edition because there's just so many new experiences that I keep discovering. Australia was a deep dive. It took 2.5 years to do the 1st edition of the Canadian book. It took me 6 months to do Australia with kids, which was... I don't recommend.
Like the kids were with you.
Kids were with me. The Australian book, and then the kids' book came out as well, which was just traveling with kids, which is a brutally honest. It says on the back here, if you're thinking about traveling with kids across Australia, don't do it. I'm just brutally honest. But the US seems to be this albatross that's waiting to be explored. I haven't explored a hell of a lot of the US. An American bucket list seems like it would go down really well, but it's so big. It would require an enormous amount of planning, an enormous amount of time. My kids are not old enough yet for me to kind of devote that kind of time, but it seems like something, I've got so many so many expectations and presumptions about the US. And I have traveled here and there, but the idea of going to places that we don't think of, and Americans probably don't think of. It's such a huge country. I expect it would be quite surprising. For example, like when I asked adventure writers, where's the best river rafting? And they said Idaho. I was like,
never would have thought.
Where's Idaho? It's so I imagine there's a lot like that. So maybe that would be a good deep dive.
I love this quote. People you meet create the paradise you find. Can you explain where you heard that and what that means to you?
People that are around us shape the experience that we have. That quote came to me when I was backpacking that first year. A lot of my big epiphanies all came out of that year. And, when I went out by myself and never done anything before, and my friends and family said, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And I was like, well, because I want to learn about not just the world and have adventure and romance and celebrations and parties. Like I actually wanted to learn some things about the world. And right away, I realized that traveling by myself opened me up to way more social encounters, meeting people from all walks of life. And I actually engaged everybody I'd meet in a conversation and asked them 3 questions about their lives. And pretty quickly, I realized that if I was having a bad time, I was first and foremost to blame for that. Like my attitude was to blame for that. It wasn't the place's fault. The place is the place. It was my either how I was feeling. And then I would look around and go, well, why am I feeling this way? And very often it would be like, because I'm hanging around with people I don't want to be hanging out with. Right. So I'd be like, nice to hang out with you guys, because you can do that when you're traveling by yourself.
Gotta go.
Gotta go.
Super busy.
And as soon as you do that, it's like, oh, suddenly things are just way better. And then you meet some other people and you're like, oh, these are great people. And all of a sudden, that exactly the same location that I was miserable in becomes an amazing situation. The people you meet create the paradise you find. It was all about the people that were surrounding me, that I was sharing an experience with, that often had such a profound impact on how my experience went. And that doesn't mean that I had to always be around people. In fact, a lot of times I was by myself. But, when I came back and everyone said, what were your favorite destinations? It was hands down tied to where I met my favorite people on the trip. The friendships, the close friendships or relationships or whatever that formed in those destinations. And that's what gave those destinations such a rosy glow.
You've done a lot, but what projects do you have in the works, or maybe a dream project that you would like to accomplish?
Well, right now I'm just still slammed getting out this 3rd edition of the Canadian book. I'm looking at a family travel bucket list. This whole bucket list idea, I know it's cheesy and hammy, but it's just about having unique experiences with the right attitude and going to interesting places to do unique things. And I've been fortunate now to travel a lot with my kids. I try and take my kids everywhere I can. My daughter,
how old are they?
11 and 8. And my 11-year-old daughter, when she was 10, she got an open water scuba diving certification in Belize, and we went diving the Barrier Reef together. And she's up for anything, and she's awesome. We've traveled quite a lot together. Next week, I'm taking my son to New Brunswick and PEI. He's a different kind of personality, but it's just very interesting to me to travel with kids. And I want to kind of, having gone through this parenting journey, help inspire other parents to think a little bit more adventurous about adventurous and exotic destinations, whether it's in Canada or abroad. Maybe save them some of the pain I've learned traveling with kids. That's what that one book has, lots of these breakouts about, like, eating out with kids and accommodation with kids. It's all very different. That book became a bestseller in Australia, and I'd like to apply it to Canada. So that's probably on the horizon next. But in truth, every year is a blessing. And every year I think, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep this up. And every year my friends and family and my wife goes, you say that every year now. So I know, but it's a very difficult industry. It's very glamorous, and people look to it and think, oh, it's the world's best job and all this stuff. But I know people out there in our industry know it's a very tough world to operate and to make a living. And so every year it's just like, well, let's see what happens.
I do that every year. I do that like every week.
So can we keep this going?
I'm not going to be able to eat in October.
Yeah.
Right?
And I write a column for Canadian Geographic every 2 weeks called Bucket Listed. And that's fantastic. I really can cast a curious eye over things that catch my fancy. And I think my audience really enjoys it. They don't know what's going to come next. I don't know what's going to come next, so we're all in it together. But really keep this positive, this open heart, open mind. The world is not a scary place. We're going to meet some amazing people and go to amazing places, and just drive that all the through, and hopefully change a few people's minds.
Robin Esrock, this has been an absolute delight, and hopefully I will meet you next year at the Travel Media Association of Canada's conference in Saskatoon. And I've never been to the prairies, so I think it's time.
Lower your expectations and prepare to be surprised. With the prairies come built in with low expectations. You don't even have to lower anything. It's baked right in there.
Everyone's like, you're going to love Saskatoon. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Show me. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's see how it goes. Okay, thanks, Robin. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks very much. Travel well.
Thanks for listening. For more Let's Take This Outside, go to letstakethisoutside.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.